haste the day when my faith shall recite the clouds be rolled back as a scroll. The trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. So it is well with my soul. Oh, it is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my
Man. So last Sunday I ended a series of 4 sermons based on our vision statement, the 4 W's, which are, anybody remember the 4 W's? Oh, everybody's looking for a cheat sheet now. Worship. No, it's word, worship, witness, and work. And it's a good segue to mention that between last Sunday's message on work and this Sunday's message on Sabbath, that Ann and I just came back from a week of vacation. So it was nice to have a little bit of a Sabbath. We spent a week in a camper with a couple of granddaughters, and it was wild, but it was good to get away and rest and come back ready to work. So this month of June, I thought I would do a series of sermons with a kind of a bizarre series title. It's not really bizarre sounding until you find out what the individual topics are. But the series title is Extraordinary Acts of Faith. Extraordinary Acts of Faith. And of course, when I hear that, maybe one of the first things that come to my mind is like, people who do really brave and daring things. Like, I don't know, run with the bulls in was it Pamplona, Spain? Where do they do it? Pamplona? I got it right? And or just ridiculously crazy things, jumping off of a tall building, saying God will save me or something. So why Sabbath? Why start out a series of sermons on extraordinary acts of faith talking about the Sabbath? I hope that strikes you as a little weird, but I also hope that your brains are working, those wheels are turning, and you're thinking, okay, there's got to be a logic here. Let me see if I can figure it out before he tells us what it is. All right, so you've got a few seconds to work out those details. We kind of know what a Sabbath is, right? I see a tentative sort of, yeah, don't make me tell you, but I think I know what it means. Look, right? Okay. So Sabbath literally means the seventh day, literally in Hebrew. So let's take our topic, let's take our series title, and let's put them together. In what ways is Sabbath an act? Right? Because isn't taking a Sabbath resting? How is it an act? Secondly, what makes it extraordinary? I mean, maybe taking a Sabbath is extraordinary, but why? And thirdly, how does it exhibit faith? Well, let's begin with our first passage, which came from Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 through 3. We were at the end of the creation narrative that began in Genesis chapter 1. And it's the seventh day, or the Sabbath. 7 days of creation. And let's take the 7 days of creation as an instructional text. In other words, you can imagine a classroom, and you set the children down at a table or in some kind of a setting, and you hand them creation narrative in Genesis chapter 1, and you ask them, what are we supposed to learn from this text? And we get to day 7. And in the process of getting to day 7, what do we learn? Well, if you remember reading Genesis 1, and I'm guessing that all of you have done this, right? Has anybody ever said, well, I'm going to read the entire Bible. I'm going to start with Genesis, and you get through at least 2 or 3 chapters before you give up? Okay, all right. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that probably all of you have read chapter 1. Do you ever notice that pattern that's there? God said, let there be, and it was. And God saw what he had made, and it was good. You see that pattern repeated throughout all 6 days. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And it was good. And God saw that it was good, or whatever. And then there was evening, and there was morning, a first day. There was evening and morning, a second day. Notice that the days begin with evening, and they go on to morning. So if you ever want to know why the Jewish Sabbath begins on Friday evening, because sundown is evening, right? So the Sabbath begins at evening because creation began with evening and then morning. All right. So it's orderly, it's patterned, it makes sense. God said, and it was, and he saw that it was good. But day 7 is different. And I sort of highlighted the text there in Genesis 2 when I had it up there on the screen. You may have noticed some bold letters. In fact, I know our wizard back in the booth can probably pull it up pretty quickly. Looky there. And on the 7th, notice the emboldened words. And on the 7th day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day. That's the first thing. From all the work he had done. That's different from days 1 through 6. Hopefully you see that. If you don't see that, do your homework. Go back and reread it. And he rested on the 7th day from the work he had done. And then in the next verse, so God blessed the 7th day and hallowed it. Hallowed it, in some translations say consecrated it or sanctified it, but simply it means that he made it holy. So 3 things are different about the Sabbath day or the 7th day. God rested. Secondly, he blessed it. And thirdly, he made it holy. It does not say this about any of the other days of creation. So what does this instructional text teach us about the 7th day? This is the part where the teacher stops talking and the students offer their answers, right? What does this instructional text teach us about the 7th day? Now, so far, it's not a command, but if you move over to our next text, which is Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. All right, I didn't make y'all answer the hard question, but I'm going to make you answer the easy question. Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. What famous text is this? I give you a hint. How many fingers do you have on your hands? Most of you? 10? And yeah, you have 5 and 5? Okay. So 10 what? Thank you. See, I'm just working this crowd, trying desperately to get them. I feel like this is like Blue's Clues. I'm looking at the camera going, the 10? Right, commandments. I feel like Steve on Blue's Clues. Okay, here we go. So, the 10 commandments. God, thank you, Raymond. Sorry about that. Please put that text back up there. Thank you. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. See, I emboldened the words again because you'll see the same 3 things. Here it's a command. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. Let's go on down to the last verse in the middle. But rested the 7th day and consecrated it. Thanks, Raymond, for that. So not only did God rest on the seventh day and bless the seventh day and make it holy, but then he commanded the Israelites to do the same. But did you know that this is not the first time that Sabbath is commanded in the book of Exodus? But there's a very important point to be made here, so I'll say this very seriously and very carefully. Before God gave the Ten Commandments, before God gave the Torah. Okay, now I know you heard what I said, but I want to just emphasize that because to me this is like really important. Before God gave the Ten Commandments, before God gave the Torah, before God told them to build the tabernacle, before God told them to build the Ark of the Covenant or the altars, before all of that, he commanded them to take a Sabbath. Okay? So if the Ten Commandments is in Exodus chapter 20, we can back up 4 chapters to Exodus chapter 16. Exodus chapter 16, verses 22 through 24. And so it was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, you know, the manna that was out on the ground. And all the rulers of the congregation came to Moses. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today and boil what you will boil today, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept till morning." So they laid up all till morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. Now, if you're thinking, why stink and worms? Remember that in the desert, when God provided them with manna, you know, being a good teacher, he told them, only collect enough for today. Don't get greedy. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Don't collect more than you need. Anything that's left over is going to rot and have worms in it, right? Except on Friday. On Friday, you get double. You get what you need for Friday, and you get what you need for the Sabbath, because there's no working on the Sabbath. By the way, this will come as no surprise to you, but maybe you already knew this. The crock pot was invented by Jewish people. Why? Because you can put a meal in there on a Friday afternoon, and by Sabbath time, it's ready to eat, and there's no cooking, no work to be done. How about that? Totally makes sense. Based on this idea of Sabbath. And think about why God was giving these Israelites in the desert a Sabbath. Where had he just rescued them from? Egypt, and from slavery, from over 400 years of slavery. Now, slavery is bad in any time and in any place. Imagine what it would be like to endure 400 years of slavery, which, by the way, is about the number of years that slavery existed here in North America, starting about 1620. They needed rest. Brought them out of Egypt, out of slavery, out of bondage, but into the desert. And let that sink in too. Thousands or even millions of people, some have estimated 2.5 million people. That's on the high side. On the low side, you would still have hundreds of thousands of people in the desert who did not know what a Sabbath was, who had spent centuries laboring in a foreign land. Their children thrown to the crocodiles in the Nile River if they happened to be boys there towards the end. They needed a Sabbath rest. You see, in our world today, people look at the Sabbath, it's kind of like a lame rule or a punishment, like, okay, stop working, go to bed. You know, it's like, when we were with our grandchildren this week, we know they need a nap. They don't think so. They think they just want to play and play and play. But what happens when they don't get that nap in the afternoon? They are cranky, let me tell you. It's tough. We need the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a day of rest from labor. And we need that. And whether we acknowledge it or not, it's not a lame rule. It's not a, you're going to do this because I told you to rule. It's for our own benefit. So let's go back and answer our 3 questions that I asked at the beginning. First of all, what makes Sabbath an act? Well, it takes willpower to cease from labor. Now, I'll admit to you, when I was, a teenager and working at McDonald's, it did not take willpower to stop working, right? It was like, oh, I can't wait for that, for the clock to hit whatever hour I need to get out of here, right? I didn't mind making the money, but I didn't necessarily want to be there any longer than I had to. It's different when we're adults, isn't it? It's different when we're driven. It's different if we own a business. It takes willpower to cease from labor. Just this morning, I was making a smoothie for breakfast, and I'm like, I should unload the silverware from the dishwasher while I'm waiting, Let's work. I did, though. I sinned this morning. I emptied the silverware out of the dishwasher. It takes willpower to cease from labor. It takes willpower to cease from labor, especially when we look at our debt-to-income ratio. Right? There are some people who could comfortably retire, but maybe they're thinking, oh, I need to make some more money. I need to, just to be sure, just to be on the safe side. I don't blame you for that. That's not really a problem. I don't see that as a problem. There are some people who probably work extra hours, extra jobs because they have to, but there are some people who because they want to. And when we look at what it costs to live, it's easy to want more work in order to get more money. And the more we think in terms of economics, the harder it is to rest from labor. So, Sabbath is an act because it requires willpower. It requires us to say, I need to cease my labor and I need to rest. The second question was, what makes it extraordinary? Well, the Israelites were a mass of people camped out in a desert. Survival takes effort. I don't know how many of you have ever been out in the desert, but there's not a whole lot to go by. Even the idea of chopping up cactus to get water out of it, that takes work. Can you imagine whether we're on the low side with, 600,000 people or on the high side with 2.5 to 3 million people? How do you feed them in the Sinai desert? It takes work to survive. But let's not leave it at that. After they entered the promised land, after they settled, what were they? They were farmers. And even as recent as 100 years ago or less than 100 years ago, if you grew up on a farm, it took effort, right? It did. That's why all those farming families from decades ago had, 8 kids, 10 kids? Because it took a lot of hands, a lot of hours every day to produce enough food to feed the family and then to make a little bit of a profit in order to acquire the other needs of life. So subsistence farming takes all the effort that we can manage in every day. So what makes taking a Sabbath extraordinary? Taking a day off from that labor. And that leads us to the answer to the third question. What makes Sabbath an act of faith? Well, it's an act of obedience to God. Last week we talked about Abraham in his old age. God told him to take his son Isaac, his only son, and sacrifice him. And Abraham was at the point in his life in which he did not question God any longer, but he just acted. It's kind of like that with the Sabbath too. Whether you're a subsistence farmer, whether you're refugees in the desert, or whether you're a CEO of a company, a lawyer, or an hourly worker, whatever. Taking a break from work is an act of faith. It means trusting in God's wisdom that if you take that rest, it will not hurt you, it will help you. Again, think about my little granddaughters. I don't want to take a nap, but you need to take a nap. You'll be glad that you did. It's an act of faith because it goes counter, it runs counter to the economic thinking of our world. But if you need to know whether it works, ask Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A, because of the Christian beliefs of its founder, Truett Cathy, resolved to be closed on Sundays. Business is closed on Sundays. What is the practical, worldly, economic wisdom of being closed on Sundays? You're crazy. You're missing out on a lot of revenue. That's one of the most important days of the week to make revenue. Chick-fil-A says we will be closed anyway. What do you suppose is one of the highest grossing fast food industries in this country? Chick-fil-A. Taking a Sabbath does not keep them from being prosperous or productive. Our land right now is kind of in a time of Sabbath, and by that I mean many of us have been pulled away from our daily lives, from our routines, from our jobs, from our work, from our families, from social interaction because of this pandemic. And I remember hearing on the radio just a week ago some people talking about how sales are down and it's bad for the economy. And they're just worried that Christmas is going to be terrible because companies will not be able to make enough money. Now, I get it. I'm saying something that sounds crazy and ridiculous and nonsensical to a lot of people. But we have created this economic need. We have created this need that every Christmas the retailers have to make more money than the year before. But that's an imaginary need. And all the structures that are built on that are all built on the idea of economics. There is no rest in economics. There's no Sabbath. There's no faith. There's only work. There's only that bigger and better barn, if you remember that parable that Jesus told. And now, thanks to this pandemic, why don't we think of it as a Sabbath? Why don't we think of it as an opportunity to kind of sit back and reflect? Have you noticed how clean the air seems outside because there are less people driving? Have you been able to look at the stars at night if you live in the city like we do, when in the past the smog has kind of obscured the view of the night sky? Have you lost weight because you've been cooking your own meals and walking more? How is this? I know it's bad because people are dying and people are sick. I don't mean to minimize that. But why not look at it as a Sabbath? Why not look at it as an opportunity to sort of rearrange our priorities a little bit so that even when something like normalcy arrives or a new normal comes to us, that we don't forget to rest. We don't forget to take that time out. Now, Sabbath is for worship. It's a day to be with God. It's a day to be with family. It's a day to worship and pray and read Scripture and sing beautiful songs and so forth. But it's also a day of rest. From the book of Acts, we read that the Christians, the church, met on the first day of the week. Why? Because Jesus rose from the grave on the first day of the week. For us, our Sabbath is on the first day of the week. We cease from our labor. We put on our Sunday best. We come to a place like this. We sing and we pray to God, and we meet about the table and partake of the Lord's Supper. We enjoy the fellowship of I started to say handshaking and hugging, but sorry, kind of had to lay off on that for a while. But I have some good news for you. the restrictions have been changed, and now we can have 25 people here. So for all intents and purposes, we're open. We have enough space in this room for you to come back and to be part of our worship service. And that's why we're here, to rest from our labor, to pause, to be refreshed. Coming to church, observing the Sabbath, worshiping God is not a lame command where God says, do this because I require it of you. It is like telling your child to take a nap. It is like saying, take a rest from your labor. It's like saying, take a vacation and enjoy a moment. It is a blessing to be able to come and to be in God's house. But know that it is counterintuitive and it is countercultural in our day. It is an extraordinary act of faith.
Take time to be holy, speak oft with thy Lord. Abide in him always, and feed on his word. Make friends of God's children, help those who are weak, forgetting in nothing God's blessing to seek. Take time to be holy, be calm in thy soul. Each thought and each motive beneath his control. Thus led by his Spirit to fountains of love, thou soon shalt be fitted for service above.
Hope that it's been a blessing for you to be with us today. We are so grateful for all of you who are with us live on Facebook, and for those of you who watch our recordings on YouTube or Vimeo. Thankful for you and your support of our congregation and our work. Thankful for the members of our congregation who have faithfully continued to support this congregation, this church, and its work throughout this community, even while being quarantined at home. For those of you who feel comfortable, that you feel safe, you're not sick, you're not exhibiting any symptoms of COVID-19, we invite you to be here on Sunday, next Sunday, and be part of our worship service. We have chairs that are spaced out. They're probably 10 feet apart by 10 feet apart, and we have room for more. We are observing social distancing and other regulations. I have my mask here, and we have hand sanitizer at all the exits. We have, what else? We have rubber gloves. We have the infrared thermometer, you name it. We will be careful. We are observing the rules. Oh, and we have the disposable communion so that nobody has to breathe on anyone else's cup or bread or whatever. So we invite you to come and be a part of the service here. Also thankful to everyone who has taken time out of their busy schedules to be with us here and to lead or assist in worship. I'll start at the camera. We have a new camera woman, Jill Chu, who's done an excellent job today, assisted by Jim Holliday. And in the booth, of course, Raymond Rosario, who's doing 12 people's jobs back there. Our elder and worship leader today, Diane Lanier. Over here in the music department, our minister of music, choir director, and pianist during the pandemic, my wife, Ann Edmondson, at the piano. And, of course, on vocals, Ed Brucker and Robert Pecorino. We continue to have our drive-through food drive, so we welcome anybody in the community to drop non-perishables off at the church, and we will get those to Networks. We will begin on Wednesday evening of this week at 7 p.m. to have a prayer chat for those who continue to stay at home but want to have some interaction and share. So I will send that information out this week. I know I'm forgetting something, but I think I'll stop there. Pray that God will bless you, that you will take time today to be holy and to rest in the Lord. Our blessing at the end of the service today comes from the Jewish prayer book, and it is a blessing both to God and to the people. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and favored us, and given us in love and favor his holy Sabbath as an inheritance, as a remembrance of the act of creation. For this day is the beginning of all holy days, a remembrance of the exodus from Egypt. For you have chosen us, and you have blessed us from among all the nations, and you have bequeathed us your holy Sabbath in love and favor. Blessed are you, Lord, who sanctifies the Sabbath. And as a Christian blessing, let me add, may God bless you with rest today. May he fill you with his Holy Spirit and empower you to work for the other 6 days of the week. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.